Psalm 96 is just one exuberant shout. Psalm 96, 97, and 98 are three psalms that are grouped together. They have many things in common with one another. And some have said that these three psalms are, in fact, the heart of the psalms, the central psalms of the entire collection of the psalms. Not sure about that, but a pretty good case can be made that this is the heart of the psalms and this message that God reigns and God is coming to judge and make things right. This psalm, like the other psalms in Book 4, Psalms 91 through 100, are untitled. However, this psalm in particular is identical to a portion of David's Song of Thanksgiving in 1 Chronicles 16, 23 through 33. So, pretty fair assumption that this psalm was composed by David, but his authorship in this collection was irrelevant. It wasn't noted here because these are psalms for corporate worship, and if they're collected during time of the exile, the accent was not on David and the monarchy because there was no such thing. The monarchy had come to an end, and these psalms in Book 4 are to recognize that God is the king, not David, but that Yahweh himself has been and always will be the king. It was used, no doubt, in corporate worship, and it is a hymn. In actuality, it is three hymns, or at least three movements of a single hymn. And the psalmist sees all of creation as rejoicing as Yahweh comes to judge. We begin with the nation of Israel, and then we move to the nations, and then to all of creation. We note that there are groups of three, as we saw in other hymns as well, three suggesting completeness or totality. And so we have three sections of this psalm, or three hymns, and then three commands here. Oh, sing to the Lord a new song, sing to the Lord all the earth, sing to the Lord, bless his name. There's a triplet of summoning to praise, specifically to sing, to make music. And as we saw in other hymns, the hymn is going to answer the questions what, who, when, why, where, how. And in this case, it is what is to sing. The who is all the earth. The when is from day to day. That would be every day. Declare his glory among the nations. That's the where. And you see the references to the nations, the peoples. And the why is because he's to be feared above all gods. Now, we suggest here that this first stanza is addressed to Israel. The reason for that is that Israel alone knows God's salvation. They've experienced God's rescue out of Egypt. They have seen his glory, his marvelous works. So they are the ones who have experienced this. They are the redeemed. They are the ones that can proclaim to the nations, those who haven't seen God's salvation, his marvelous works. So that's why I suggest that the first movement here is addressed to believers, in this case, to Israel, to call them to be witnesses of God's glory and his marvelous works. Note in verse 4 that he is to be feared above all gods. This is echoes of Psalm 95, which said he is the great king above all gods, acknowledging that people, nations, will worship other gods. There are an abundance of gods in this world. Don't let anyone tell you that we're atheists. No, everyone worships something. And the psalmist declares here that God is to be feared. He is worthy of worship above all gods. He is greatly to be praised. For the gods of the peoples are worthless idols. So everyone will worship someone or something. The question is that object of our worship worthy of it? Because that which we worship transforms us into its likeness. And so we want to worship the one who is worthy of our worship, and the one whose worship will transform us into something better, who will call us to something better, make us into something better, make us into his likeness, into his image. Speaking of that, verse 6 tells us that in heaven, before God, in his sanctuary, are splendor, majesty, strength, beauty. These four attributes are personified as throne attendants around God, describing his nature, revealing who he is. So this is the summons to Israel, this call to worship and witness of who God is and his worthiness to be worshiped. The next call goes to the nations, and we see once again a triplet of commands. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of people. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. The who here in this case is families of peoples, or the nations, the outsiders who have heard the testimony of Israel and have come to know the God. What are they to do? They're to ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. And we see here the exact wording that we saw in Psalm 29, which was a psalm of David. So it makes sense that Psalm 96 would also be a psalm of David. Identical words here, with the exception of Psalm 29. The invitation is to the heavenly beings, to the throne angels, which we've just had referenced in the previous verse 6, God's sanctuary, God's throne. So the movement here is to families of the people. So ascribing to the Lord glory and strength, inviting the nations to do this as well, because they have heard Israel testify to God's salvation and his marvelous works. To bring an offering, to worship the Lord, to tremble before him, and then to say among the nations, the Lord reigns. This is the theme of Book 4. The world is established, it shall never be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. This is the theme that we've seen in these Psalms as well, that God is coming to judge his creation. Speaking of that, we move now to the third hymn, the third movement, and that is a call to all of creation to worship. Again, a threefold invitation here, to the heavens, the earth, and to the sea, and all that fills it. So water, earth, and sky are invited to join in this song. And not only that, verse 12 divides the land into two areas. To the field, that would be the domesticated, the cultivated aspects of the world, and then the trees of the forest, that would be the wild, the undomesticated. So everything, so just another way of saying absolutely every bit of creation will rejoice in this. Why? For the Lord comes, he comes to judge the earth, the world, and its peoples in righteousness and faithfulness. So there is joy when the Lord comes to make things right. A summary of the psalm is indicated here. As you can see, there are three hymns, three movements to it, each addressing a different group. And this is echoed in Revelation. When you think about the descriptions of worship in Revelation, there's a series of concentric circles. There is God enthroned, and he is surrounded by throne angels, cherubim, seraphim, and all the angels of heaven that are worshiping him. And then around them are those who are redeemed from every nation, language, tribe, and tongue. And then around that, then it says everything in all creation joins in worship. And so John, as he portrays worship in heaven, sees this same kind of series of concentric circles that spirals and builds to include all things. And there you see a summary that the motivation for praise in each one of those sections of the hymn. I can't help but think of what Paul said in Romans 8:19 through 22 about creation. Creation waiting with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it. That is, the man. We have, by our sin, brought a curse upon the earth, and so creation, it groans under that curse. Verse 21, that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. That the coming of Christ and his church has begun this process of restoration, and that the creation itself can celebrate as God has come in Christ to judge and to institute a kingdom of justice and his glorious reign. And the curse has begun to be reversed. And so creation can celebrate. Psalm 96 can begin to be actualized in Christ and in his church, and ultimately when Christ returns to complete the work that he began. What a beautiful picture of what is now and what is to come. Psalm 96.